Let me first talk a little bit about methodology. We've collected election results going back 20 years, as I discussed. We also did a telephone poll of 500 people who voted in the 2006 election that started the Thursday after the election, so 2 days after the election. That poll was commissioned by one of the residents of this building, Colorado Conservation Voters, the League of Conservation Voters, and National Wildlife Action Fund. And part of the point of that poll is to find out what happened in the 2006 election, why did people vote the way they did, what lessons can we learn for it, and a little bit of tactics, what worked, what didn't internally. So I'm not going to get into the tactics, but more talk about what worked, or why did people vote the way they did, and what is the current movement within Colorado. We've had a lot of change here over the past 10 years. What's going on electorally? So we look at this here. 4 years ago, Colorado had Republican governor, 2 Republican U.S. senators, 5 of 7 Republican members of Congress, Republican majority in both chambers of the legislature. In 2004 presidential election, neither party really challenged Colorado. There were sort of some feints and moves. Kerry came in a little bit with TV. Bush sort of came in with a little TV. But really they weren't playing. It was a game. But nobody really targeted Colorado in 2004. In 2000, we were completely off the targeted map. Now you look at where we are. Democratic governor, 1 Democratic U.S. senator out of 2, 4 of 7 Democratic members of Congress, and Democratic majority in both state house chambers. Both both parties are targeting Colorado at the top of their list for 2008 swing states, and Denver has a Democratic National Convention. Holy cow. This is a sea change. How did that happen and why? Go ahead. Just start to hit the arrow. Yep. And another one. So, is there a big shift in party registration? How people register in Colorado, Democrat, Republican, unaffiliated. Here we were in 1992. Now, just for historical purposes, this is when I left Colorado, and this is when I came back. And I don't know what happened over here, but y'all dropped the ball. Slight Democratic registration advantage. But basically, Colorado in 1992 was a political scientist's dream. It was 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Anybody can win it. It's a perfect state. Then we start moving between 92 and 96, right? We had the Republican takeover in 94 nationally and in Colorado, and there is a massive jump. Republicans surge. Democrats drop. Even unaffiliateds aren't hanging in there. Then in 2000, it just sort of steadies, and we just here are the Democrats. We're not moving. Unaffiliateds moving a little bit. Republicans here. So now, 2004 was a pretty good year. Democrats over Republicans. Salazar wins, pick up both chambers of the state legislature. It was not done on party registration. There's really no movements. Republicans are still sitting on 37. Now, 2006, this is actually the most recent results we can get, county by county, as of right now. The gap decreased by 17,000 votes. Not a lot. So, it's not party registration. Yet, with that party registration change, without it, go ahead, what are the voting trends? We like to look at Regent for Democratic performance. And Steve Ludwig, who's the new Regent, will probably take this personally. Nobody knows who they're voting for Regent outside the absolute dead-on party activists. So, when you're voting for Regent, it's kind of a D versus R test. So we track Regent races going back to 1990. Right? This is back when party affiliation was very close. And Republican candidates won in both 90 and 92, basically 51-49, if you average it out for a 2-party vote. Then we hit 94, boom, this opens up. And for 10 years, for 8 years, it's basically 58-42 and 59-41, every race. And then all of a sudden, in 2004, Jennifer Mellon loses with 49.7% of the vote. There was a third-party candidate, so we averaged that out. So it just closes. And then in 2006, Democrat wins a Regent race by the slimmest of slim margins, but wins. So Democratic performance, which is tracked by the Regents, hits 50%. That is historic. We haven't won a Regents race, Democrats, since 1976. So that's a 30-year trend that was broken in 2006. Go into the next one. Was it just region? No. This is the cumulative vote for Congress by party. Now this is, in 2000, deceptively low because the Democrats really didn't field candidates at all in CD4 and CD5. But it's a direct line, 2000, 2002, 2004, 2006. In 2006, Democrats got 12% more of the vote on the congressional level. Mark Udall wins convincingly. Salazar wins the third CD convincingly. Perlmutter ends up defeating O'Donnell, relatively solid margin. DeGette wins big. We're competitive in CD5, and in CD4, relatively competitive. So the congressional vote map has completely shifted. So now gubernatorial race. Ritter beat Beaupre by a historic margin. When I say historic margin, we had to look back. The last time a Republican received that low of the vote was John Andrews against Roy Romer. And that was the John Andrews, if you remember, when he was head of the Independence Institute, and there were stories about how they were praying to plants to try and make them grow faster. It was not a serious race. This was a serious race. Beaupre was favored 2 years ago. There were a lot of people who didn't think Bill Ritter could win, and he not only won, but he basically set a Democratic record for vote performance. How did that happen? When? Why? So in our post-election poll, we asked voters, what was the single most important issue when you made your decision who to vote for? Immigration, number one. That's a little odd. That's kind of not Bill Ritter's issue. Economy, number two. Education, three. Energy and renewable energy comes out of nowhere as an issue and becomes number four. Now, a lot of people in this room have had a lot done on renewable energy. This wasn't an issue 4 years ago. You do a poll and people didn't know what renewable energy was. It was that, I don't know what that is. That wasn't Back to the Future, right? They put it in the DeLorean and it flew. They don't know what it is. Now it's the number 4 voting issue in the state of Colorado, and it's an issue that people who voted on energy voted Democrat overwhelmingly. Bill Ritter won these voters by a 6-1 margin over Bob Beaupre. Got them all, basically.
Did you ask them which of the categories they thought was important, or did you listen to them and say which of the categories and then keep track?
We asked them, of these issues, what was your number one?
Environment is a question.
Correct. We went with energy. And then we went with water, which got 6%. Amongst the Western Slope voters, water was at 12%. So a very big issue again. We tracked all of the polling that Ritter Braden did throughout the entire election cycle of the Ritter versus Beaupre race. And we've got back here November, a year out. Ritter has a little bit of a lead. Then it goes down and it's basically even. So you're starting February 21, basically even. Starts tracking a little bit here. And then Ritter just has this lead. And remember, Beaupre's got the primary with Holtzman, so the Republican base hasn't really solidified yet. And then the Republican primary is getting a little nasty in here. But then we get into general election. But what happens? Holtzman's kind of out at this point, petition challenge, all that mess. Beaupre's still dropping. Ritter's staying at least even. Beaupre's just going down and down and down. Now, right here, June 30th. Beaupre flips on Amendment 38. Right? He was in favor of it. He was siding with Douglas Bruce on the petition challenge. Then the Chambers of Commerce, the business community convinced him this is absolutely ridiculous. It's a horrible idea. You've got to be against it. He flips. A lot of people here, Progress Now particularly, help brand him as both ways Bob. That name starts to stick right here. And he starts to go down. And he says, okay, Republican base starts coming around at the end of the summer. Holtzman's gone. They're really getting their act back together. He's risen up to 40%. Ritter's cooking, though. He's at 50. And then, boom, he names Janet Rowland lieutenant governor. The press around that is absolutely horrific. Sheep marrying sheep, sheep bestiality, all of that just is a disaster. And whether that directly influences the vote or not, it's hard to tell, but certainly there's a line going down. Then we get 70% of black pregnancies end in abortions. Another, what is Bob Beaupre talking about? This guy's just out there, and he's falling. Ritter is just cooking along. Now we get, Beaupre has nothing to do with it, the Mark Foley congressional scandal. At this point, Beaupre's just hit the bottom. He's just done. And Ritter's like, woo! I'm just flying along here. This is all good. You keep doing what you're doing, Beaupre. This is awesome. And then we get the investigation into the how did you get the information about the immigrant, all of that fun stuff, and he's just stuck it. He's just done. And this is October 19th was our last poll. So election day comes around and it ends up being 56 point something to basically 40. This race was over back here. Beaupre could not make it up. Now, one of the reasons it was over back there is the national mood. We've got Beaupre here. This is the national congressional Republican, national congressional Dems. Look at the track with Beaupre and national congressionals. Late August, corruption, Abramoff, Iraq, everything bad. And it sticks with the Republican Party and it sticks with Beaupre. And he's going with it. It's very clear break. And look at the move up here for Democrats, congressional. Next one. Now we add in President Bush's approval rating. Look at the track with Beaupre. Up, up, down, down, up, up, down, down. He hurt himself with a lot of bad comments. He hurt himself by running what just about everyone would agree was a relatively poor campaign. But he also had a national mood working against him, and that helped all Colorado Democrats. Ritter, all the way down the ticket, are buoyed by this Bush drag. Iraq, corruption, everything just made an anti-Republican feel, and Ritter was right on top of that. Who voted for Bill Ritter? Who voted for Bob Beaupre? How did Ritter get this high of a percentage of the vote? Age across the board. Young voters, basically a 20-point margin for Ritter. Just absolutely dominant amongst young voters. Now, back 10, 12 years ago, all the young voters were starting to break Republican in Colorado. You had kind of the Reagan thing going on, and it was just starting to get a little bit young. Now they're definitely trending Democrat. Seniors. Traditionally, hard fought out, but Republicans have a minor edge amongst 65 plus. And traditionally a very good edge amongst 55 to 64. Ritter wins convincingly. Every age bracket. But look at this. Look at this gender gap. Women by a 23-point margin favor Ritter over Beaupre. Just a stunning gender gap. Now he even wins amongst men, which is almost unheard of in Colorado in the last 15 years. But the gender gap catapults him and just makes up that margin. Nationally, Colorado, locally, women broke Democrat in amazing numbers this year. This, to me, is the most amazing thing. Registered unaffiliated voters. Who did you vote for? Ritter, 66, Beaupre, 22, other, 12. 3-to-1 margin. Everything you do in Colorado politics in a general election is aimed at winning the unaffiliated vote, and it was overwhelming for Ritter. They just completely broke his way. A lot of that came post-Abramoff scandal, post-Foley scandal. The late breakers all went with Ritter as a little bit of a he's going to win, jump on the team kind of thing. But just an amazing number here. He did not break into the Republican base in a major, major way. It's not a bad vote to get 20%, but it's not huge. Democrats overwhelmingly with Ritter, very, very few with Beaupre. So, this is where he wins it. Yeah, we could skip married, single. Catholics. Arguably the biggest swing vote in Colorado. Salazar won them a little more narrowly in 2004. A lot of competition in 2006. Huge margin for Bill Ritter amongst Catholics. Protestants, a minor margin for Beaupre. But if you're a Republican, you want to win in Colorado, you need a double-digit margin amongst Protestants because that's going to include the evangelicals. The other and the none, traditionally Democratic, no big surprise there. But winning the Catholic vote by that margin is just amazing. Now look at the regions. Denver, no surprise, 68%. South Front Range, Beaupre still wins. South Front Range, you've got El Paso County, you've got Douglas County, not good Democratic areas. The Plains, becoming increasingly Republican, even in this gubernatorial race, Beaupre gets a very solid percentage here. Metro, Jeffco, Adams, Arapahoe, huge win for Ritter. Again, the suburban swing targets break for Ritter. This, though, is the most surprising out of the whole thing for me. Western Slope, 55-34. This is a polling result, so we were a little questionable about it. So we looked up and we did the county by county. It tracks right on with that. Ritter won the Western Slope by 20%. This is not Democratic-friendly area. That's good campaign. That's good issues. That's environment. That's energy. That's the hunters and the fishers. The Bill Ritter with the fly fishing. Bill Ritter Outdoors Trust. All the work they did with what I'll call the hook and bullet crowd pays off huge. This is also a split referendum A, referendum C. Western Slope referendum A, more than anything, started driving their votes. And when we asked them the importance of referendum A for Western Slope voters, it was huge. And you had the Republican ticket, basically, in both 04 and 06, in favor of Ref A or had supported Ref A, Democratic ticket who had opposed it. And Ritter absolutely capitalizes on this, winning counties by huge margins that Democrats generally don't do well in, and only losing certain big counties like Mesa by tiny margins. So doing very well there. And then the North Front Range, Boulder, Larimer, Weld, etc., another huge margin. Larimer, Ritter wins comfortably. That used to be the formula back in 92. You can win Larimer. 2000, 2002, 2004 even, we lose Larimer. Strickland got crushed there against Allard. Part of that was Allard's base, but he loses that county by a huge margin. Now it's coming back home. We compared the exit polling in 04 for Salazar with our poll for Ritter and kind of give an idea of where did Ritter outperform Ken Salazar. And the key area really, registered unaffiliated, independents, which we've talked about, you just much higher result, and even Catholics. Now, Ken Salazar was a Catholic. He ran a campaign about being a Catholic, got a little fight with Chaput on some little issues, but generally pretty solid on that, yet Ritter really wins that swing category by a larger margin. What are the issues? What played out? What was important? How did it all work? What we have here is, on a 1 to 10 scale, how important was this issue in making up your vote? High, low. Then, what candidate do you trust on that issue, Bill Ritter or Bob Beaupre? Usually, there's kind of a split here, and we do Ritter over here, we do Beaupre over here. We don't have a Beaupre. There was no issue that we tested on that Bob Beaupre had more trust than Bill Ritter. Now, if we would have asked taxes or shrinking government, it's likely Beaupre would have won those. But on the main issues we asked, education, environment, economy and jobs, renewable energy, protecting wildlife, protecting water, and immigration, Bill Ritter had a trust margin on all of them. So instead of just picking out what single issue drove your vote, where we saw immigration at 27%, how important was each issue? The top two, still H, this is immigration, and economy and jobs. These are the top two. Amongst voters, even immigration, Ritter has a trust advantage. Bottom line is, some people thought Beaupre went too far on immigration. Also, voters didn't trust anyone. I don't trust either of you guys to fix immigration. I think people are dishonest about this issue. There was no winning margin for Beaupre on immigration. Economy. We did a poll in June, talked about which parties do you trust, what people do you trust on the economy, and it was much more of a Republican-leaning issue. Now, Ritter trusted by 12% margin over Beaupre on the economy. Then look at this. Water. Wow. Number 3 when ranked by mean importance. Ritter, 18% margin. Huge advantage for Ritter on a very big issue. When we look at Western Slope voters, that's up there. It's a huge issue. Now we get into these 3. Education, environment, energy. Look at the margin Ritter's piling up. 25% basically on important issues. Then we got protecting wildlife, lower on the importance scale, very much in the Ritter column. But what you see here is, how is Beaupre going to win if he's not winning on the economy and he's not winning on immigration? Right? We can expect maybe Ritter's going to win on energy, and Ritter may have a lead on the environment, and Ritter may have a lead on education. But when it's 25%, it's overwhelming. And you look at registered unaffiliated, right? The target voters. Now, the graph changed down here, right? It used to be 5% Ritter margin at a minimum. Amongst registered unaffiliated voters, Ritter had a 20% trust gap over Beaupre. 20%. Every other issue was more than 40%. Unaffiliated voters simply did not trust Beaupre on the important issues of the election. Now, where is it happening? Let's look at that for a second. 2004 election showed suburban counties voting at a higher levels. You had Arapahoe and Jefferson surging. Salazar did very well there. Jennifer Mello and Regent did very well there. 06 showed a different shift. Western slope. Whether it's renewable energy, referendum A, the candidates we nominated, Democrats improved their performance all across the western slope. We look at Tom Strickland 02 against Kerry Kennedy, who ran for treasurer in 06 and won. Again, down ballot, not that well known. Who moved? What are the big differences? 16 of the 20 biggest moving counties between those two races are on the western slope. Ski areas are absolutely swinging far left. Pitkin, 9%. Eagle, almost 9%. Summit, almost 7%. 7 counties where Strickland outperformed Kennedy, all 7 are in the eastern plains. The rural, very rural, eastern vote is not getting any more Democratic, even in a good Democratic year. What is our western slope ski areas? Kennedy won the swing counties. You're talking to a candidate, you want to win in Colorado, Adams, Arapahoe, Broomfield, Jefferson, Larimer. Got to win those. She won them all. Oop, go back. Kennedy won these 5 counties by 19,000 votes. Strickland lost them by 24,000 votes. That swing alone makes up Kennedy's margin of victory in just Adams, Arapahoe, Broomfield, Jefferson, Larimer, which doesn't even get into the huge margin she picked up in the western slope. Looking at Regent's race as opposed to the Kennedy-Strickland thing, again, western slope, north front range. It is very clear Referendum C has created a Democratic surge. The 4 biggest moving of the top 10 counties, Boulder, Larimer, Mesa, Weld, college counties. Ref C drove that. I think certainly in Mesa, Ref A played a huge role. In the other 3, you're really getting into Referendum C created a divide. Those 2 referendum have really had a lasting impact on Colorado politics. Go ahead.
Jeff, what is Referendum A?
Referendum A was the 2003 election that was dubbed the $3 billion pork barrel, but it was trans-basin diversion. $3 billion blank check by people in this room. Governor Romer pushed it as a way to solve the water problem. Sorry, God, I'm all over the place. Owens pushed it as a way to solve the water problem. It was voted down, what were the numbers, 58, 42-ish, pretty solidly. Even after it got voted down, it became more and more demonized, particularly in the West Slope, as a front-range water grab. You know, people in Douglas and Arapahoe County trying to steal Western Slope water. There were a lot of Republicans, Beaupre, Greg Walker probably lost the race in 2004 for Congress because of this, who supported it. And it's created a little bit of a values gap, especially on the Western Slope. Referendum C has had the same effect in college towns and elsewhere. And if you talk to the Ritter folks, they'll say, we modeled our targeting and our goals on Referendum C and D results. That was our coalition. That was our goal. This is very hard to read, but this is, again, Regent results for the 10 most populous counties going back to 1990. And this is the statewide, is the dark brown thing here. So we get up to 50% finally. Look at Boulder. Straight line. Huge move from 98 on up. Denver, back to performing better than it has, but back in kind of 92 numbers. You even see big gains coming here. Arapahoe started turning and is sort of a Democratic lean, but getting there kind of county. You know, these are the counties that are really moving. And if you look at, let's go from 2000 to 2004, before we get into 04 to 06. Who moved? And there's a little bit of the suburban swing. Arapahoe, you had Boulder moving, Denver, Jefferson, even Douglas had a pretty good move, and Larimer.
Hey, Craig.
Yeah.
Arapahoe, in particular, shows a shift. It does show a registration shift, doesn't it?
It shows a registration shift and a voting shift. You're getting a lot of sort of blue-collar, lower-income people moving out of Denver into Arapahoe County, and that is becoming more and more Democratic and I would say into the future, Arapahoe will keep moving Democratic.
Hey, Craig,
Yep.
do you think it's a shift in the voting population, so voters are actually changing, or is it a shift in the environment with folks like you just mentioned moving in? So is it environmental or is it a personality?
In Arapahoe, I think it's both. I think Arapahoe is one of the few counties where registration is changing and moving more Democratic. Most of the other counties, the registration isn't changing, but they're voting more Democratic based on certain candidates. Arapahoe is really moving. Like Jeffco, the registration isn't changing fundamentally. Arapahoe is. So then, next, from 04 to 06, who moved? As we saw, Boulder really moving. Now, part of this comes from, in 2004, the Republican regent candidate was from Boulder County, pretty well known up there. So some of that is that move. But Boulder now lives up to its image of the Boulder that, Republicans call it. It's the People's Republic of Boulder. We're getting back there. Boulder County is voting closer to Boulder City than it has in the past. And that's a big move. But then look at this. Larimer, Mesa, Weld. College. There's a huge move for the colleges. Let's go to the next one. So by region, where are we? West Slope, Eastern Plains, North Front Range, South Front Range, Denver, North Front Range, Denver, and Western Slope from 2004 to 2006. This is where the difference was. Larimer, Weld, Boulder, Mesa, Summit, Pitkin. Statewide, a little bit of move. Metro moved backwards a little bit. Did a little bit worse in Arapahoe, a little bit worse in Jefferson County from the Regents race from 04 to 06. I would tend to argue that a lot of this is gender-based. Jennifer Mello was the regent in 04. Arapahoe and Jefferson counties love female candidates. I mean, look at the state legislative delegations out there. It's amazing. So that may be a little bit of but that's something to sort of be concerned about in the future. South Front Range did significantly worse for Ludwig than for Mello. Douglas, El Paso, going worse. Again, West Slope is the great area for us. So if we add it all up, 2000 to 2006, what's that 6-year trend? Boulder, Denver, the big liberal counties are back. Larimer is absolutely moving. Arapahoe moves. It's not El Paso. We're not gaining in El Paso. Minor movement in Pueblo on the Regents race. Pueblo is very candidate specific. Bill Ritter did very well in Pueblo. Kerry Kennedy did extremely well in Pueblo. We think part of that, frankly, is just the Kennedy name. A lot of Catholics, a lot of people with a good memory of the Kennedy name. She did extraordinarily well in Pueblo, but not all Democratic candidates do. So now all counties, not just the Big Ten, where's the biggest movement from 2000 to 2006? Western Slope, ski areas. Western Slope, Western Slope, Western Slope, Western ski area, kind of West Slope, not really West Slope, but kind of on the way there. Denver, West Slope, West Slope, West Slope, West Slope, West Slope, North Front Range. The movement from 2000 to 2006 fundamentally in Colorado for Democratic candidates came in the Western Slope. You had leadership at the top of the ticket like Bill Ritter and Ken Salazar that was not only acceptable but preferable to Western Slope voters, and then they went down ticket, and for regent candidates that they did not know, I don't think Steve Ludwig's name idea in the Western Slope was above 2%, they voted D. That's a significant move. And this just sort of sums it up. In 2000, the regent candidate got 38% on the Western Slope, 57% in 2006. Denver, up 11%. The North Front Range, led by Boulder and Larimer, up 10%. Losing ground on the plains, very little movement on the South Front Range. Statewide, that's the movement. But the big move is the Western Slope. This is sort of a random thing that I did just for fun. People are talking about targeting the Mountain West, Colorado, Montana, Nevada, New Mexico. This is the presidential thing. You saw the debate in Nevada yesterday, presidential politics. We got to win the West. We got to win the West. How do we win the West? Electoral results. 1992, Bill Clinton wins all 4 of these states. Montana, Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado. Wins all 4. Now, previously in 88, Dukakis lost all 4 and lost Nevada by a frightening margin. So Bill Clinton wins them all in 92. In 96, they start to get split. A little closer, we lose Colorado, lose Montana, but by close margins, win Nevada, win New Mexico. 2000, Kerry loses all 4 of them. 2004, I'm sorry, Gore loses all 4 of them. 2004, or does he win New Mexico by he wins New Mexico by that. 2004, loses all 4. Here's the problem. No Democrat has received 50% of the vote in any of these 4 states since 1976. We have Perot, we have Nader, splitting it up. No Democrat has received a majority, 50% of the vote in any of those 4 states. There is a getting over that 46, 47% threshold that any Democratic candidate faces coming into 2008. Montana has not rebounded following 96. You're not going to see a Democrat carry Montana unless they nominate Brian Schweitzer or John Tester. It's just not going to happen. These other 3 states, though, extremely competitive, and election results would indicate, almost regardless of who's nominated, they will be extraordinarily close races. I think the rest of it is just sort of more, well, might as well do it. Constitutional offices in these 4 states. The margin we used to have, back in 92, Democrats held 6 more seats. Now, Democrats hold 7 more seats. Lost them all sort of 96, 94, 96, 98, 2000. Congressional seats, Democrats now hold a 4-seat margin in those 4 seats, which is completely surging since 2000, when we were -6. So we've moved up 10 seats congressionally in the Mountain West, what they call the Mountain West, in the last few years. Legislative seats, same track. We were down 50-plus seats. Now we're up 50-plus seats. Over 100-seat swing since 1996. And now we've got a nice little majority. You look at Colorado, huge move, obviously, that we've seen. Montana, huge move. Nevada's just stayed very same. You know what? Guess what state doesn't have term limits? Think that's a coincidence? Term limits, term limits, term limits. So, conclusion. Colorado Democrats made amazing gains, led by the Western Slope. It's clear referendum A, referendum C had a huge impact on the electorate and still do. As 2008 rolls around, U.S. Senate seat, presidential seats, remember 2 things. Republicans still hold a 162,000 vote registration advantage. Despite this, Democrats have produced victories at every level in the last 2 cycles. Those 2 things are counterbalancing against each other. You can't confuse election victories for long-term change yet. The registration numbers aren't moving, but the voters are getting more used to and more accommodating to Democratic candidates. I like to think that Colorado is back to where it was in 92 to a certain extent, that you kind of start out even as a Democrat or maybe with a little disadvantage. In 94, 96, 98, 2000, even 2002, you started out with a big disadvantage as a Democrat running statewide. And election results over the last 20 years give a lot of data to support the contention. Colorado, New Mexico, and Nevada will be amongst the most closely contested states. And a good candidate who runs a strong race, understanding Colorado values, knowing how to talk about water, knowing how to talk about renewable energy, focusing on issues like Bill Ritter did, can win these states. Montana, going to be a little bit of a bigger haul. So that is the end of the presentation.
What do we take from this to do better than I did?
I think Bill Ritter showed a way to run a race that should be, to a certain extent, modeled. You've got to pick up those swing votes in the Western Slope. And some of that is playing to those issues early and often. I think Ritter started out, his commercials were in front of the wind farm, right? That was kind of the first one. That was the image. You had him out there fly fishing. You had people like Ed Denby talking about what a great fly fisherman he was. You had him able to answer questions about, it wasn't, do you fly fish or can you? You'd be like, well, I prefer to home tie the red hogtail swallow fly that I use in the Brown River as opposed to what I use here. That's a value in the Western Slope. That's embodying a certain type of candidate there. Ken Salazar ran the same type of race. You've got to really appeal to those voters out there, pay a lot of attention early, I think is one way to do it. I think you've got a dynamic going on of a lot of, I would call them not hardcore Republicans getting comfortable voting Democrat. And some of that is referendum C and D drove a wedge in the Republican Party. You had Governor Owens on one side, you had Holtzman, Beaupre, and others, John Andrews, John Caldera on the other side, and that created an opportunity for Democrats that Bill Ritter really hit out of the park. But it came all the way down the ticket. Kerry Kennedy was picking up support in places she probably shouldn't have. Ken Gordon almost beat Mike Kaufman. When you think about it, Kaufman was the hero, come back from Iraq, volunteered, had been elected statewide before. He was the Republicans up and coming. Ken Gordon almost beat him. The ref C&D divide really is helping out Democrats up and down the ticket.
Do you think Gordon would have won if Denver hadn't screwed up the election? No.
Not quite. Very close, but not quite. Ludwig was the one who was going to have a serious case to make. It's really fortunate he won. I think Gordon needed another 15,000 votes outside of Denver County before you could say this cost him the election.
What would have changed if choice wasn't a wash in the governor's race?
I think very little. In terms of choice as an issue, there are still voters who move on it both ways. Swing voters who move on it both ways. There are female Republicans who move towards choice candidates, and then there's some of the sort of Catholics, old-timers who may move against it. I think Ritter used the way he played the choice game as a way to make himself look like more, to be more authentic. Like, I'm not going to cave into any special interest, including one in my own party. This is who I am. I think that image helped him. I don't think, whether it was on choice or labor issues or environmental issues, was necessarily critical. It was making himself authentic to who he is, and that kind of came through. I think when we asked people in polls about Bill Ritter and focus groups, what came through is he's just genuine. He's a nice guy. He's honest. I trust him. I like him. It wasn't he's anti-choice or I like the way he's played the choice game or how he's done that. It's I just kind of trust who he is and where he is.
Well, I guess I was also wondering how it would have, because you were saying Catholics were a critical swing, and so a non-Catholic choice is the genuineness going to help that candidate survive?
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you mapped any correlation with the district changes, especially with Udall going more into the central mountains? Have that had any impact?
Well, Udall had so little opposition that it's hard to tell, but he's certainly picking up mountain counties that are moving. I mean, he's got Eagle and Summit in his district now, which is fantastic for him for two reasons. One of which is it makes the second CD more Democratic, and that area is continuing to move Democratic. And the second is, as he prepares to run statewide, getting experience dealing with the voters in Summit and Eagle, I think, is critical and helps him outside the second CD.
Greg, what do you think having either a woman or a black candidate at the top of the Democratic ticket in 2 years does in that race?
I think it all depends on the kind of race they run. I think Colorado is amongst the most gender-neutral or slightly leaning female states in the country. I think it actually helps. I think Colorado is a very race-neutral state. We saw polling data on Webb when he was thinking about running for the U.S. Senate in '96. It was pretty interesting. The people lie about race on polls, so how much of this was accurate and how much of it wasn't is hard to tell. Being Denver mayor was so much worse than being black for Webb that it wasn't even funny. I mean, it was just, I'm not voting for Denver mayor, white, brown, yellow, red, I don't care. Colorado election results would tend to indicate some degree of lack of race polarized. I mean, Salazar certainly played it very well as a Hispanic twin. Campbell, as a Native American, did it and won. So I think it's the type of candidate, and it's how they do Colorado politics. They can get above the race thing. Coloradans tend to like to vote for female candidates. I mean, Kerry Kennedy certainly won as a female candidate. Gail Shetler did very well as state treasurer candidate, and then in governor came very, very, very close in a down Democratic year to beating Owens, probably in part due to being a female.
What does all this mean, given the plains are kind of getting tougher and Larimer County is kind of getting easier if you're a Democrat, for the 4th CD?
I have a hard time seeing the 4th CD being won by anything but a breakthrough Democratic candidate outside the mold of traditional Democratic candidates. 04 and 06 were the best Democratic years we've had in decades. And even in the 4th CD, they were the best Democratic years we've had in decades. It is so unbelievably hard for a Democrat to get over 48% in that district. It is just that last 2-3% is almost impossible. Even with the third party, it became nearly impossible for Piccioni, who had money, got organized early, ran a pretty strong race. it's a very, very, very tough district. You've got to have, I'll throw out a name, and it's not correct, but the West McKinley type. I don't look like a Democrat, I don't talk like a Democrat, I don't act like a Democrat. You can't accuse me of raising your taxes, and I'll shoot anybody who says otherwise. That's it. Yeah.
What about Eidsness? If he ran as a Democrat?
No, you get crushed.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Former Republican EPA.
As soon as you put the D by his name, I think he loses his appeal and just has a very hard time. First of all, I think he has a hard time raising Democratic money, which makes it difficult. But the vote there is very hard for anyone to pick up. It's a really tough district.
Do you have a graph that shows, one of the early graphs that you had sort of showed Beaupre's polls dropping when there were specific negative events? Do you have sort of the corresponding positive events on Ritter's line? Or
Yeah, we focused on the negatives.
I mean, it seems like from that graph the best strategy as a Democrat is to have a bad opponent. And
No, well, it is. I
Are
mean,
there specific like good things that happened that you could mark on there so that you can?
I would mark really early in that graph, Bill Ritter doesn't get a primary. Really early in that graph. He walked on water in this race. The way he didn't get, I mean, you had Brett Bridges, and then you had the Hickenlooper thing, and then possibly the Alice Madden thing, and Ritter just cruised through it all, didn't make any major enemies, and then everyone united behind him, and that's when he was cooking. And from that point forward, his campaign, I'm not sure that I could point to all these positive events, but a lack of major problems. No, not mistakes, not being attacked on certain issues. So certainly I could probably track back and look at positive things with Ritter in terms of announcements and what he did, and possibly when Barbara O'Brien was nominated. I'm not sure how that all worked.
It's not so much that Ritter was that in my mind, it's not so much that Beaupre was a bad opponent, it is that he was made to be a bad opponent. I mean, we have the infrastructure in Colorado now to do communications in a way we've never had that capacity before.
Yeah, and it was
African American abortion. If Media Matters wasn't monitoring, no one would know that.
right. It amplifies any mistakes. You're right. But he ran a bad campaign.
Right.
And then when you tie the ability to make those mistakes bigger with a bad campaign, with the worst Republican mood nationally we've seen since really 73 post-Watergate, he's going down. Even if he ran a good campaign, he probably would have lost. But the margin was historic.
My impression in Boulder County is that difference might be more a factor of Democrats doing a better job at turnout rather than voting habits actually switching. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts on that. How much?
Not really.
Turnout?
I think turnout for Democratic candidates in Boulder has increased, and in 2004 it was through the roof. In Larimer County, turnout in 2004 was unbelievable, and that helped Democratic candidates. In 2006, turnout was okay across the state. It was fine. It was better than 2002. It wasn't anywhere near 2004, and it fell short of most people's projections. So Boulder County's turnout was pretty good, but I think what you saw is Boulder City turnout was very strong. But also you saw Ritter, Kennedy, even Gordon winning the non-city Boulder County areas, Lafayette, Louisville, Niwot, etc., that traditionally don't go. So it was a combination of swing. It was more picking up voters in Boulder County, non-Boulder City, than it was turnout. The turnout helps and can make that last bit of difference, and I think there was a pretty big push. But if you can talk to the people in 2004 and 2002 and 2000 and 98 and 96, they'd say we had a great turnout operation in Boulder, we spent X amount of money, we did this, this, and this, it just kind of didn't work out. Message, to a certain extent, drives turnout, and then with the troops, you can really pile it on. And I think that drove a lot in the city of Boulder. But you saw people winning areas that you don't normally see Democrats winning.
Maybe one more question?
I think we may have exhausted them all.
You got them all?
All right, we're done.
Thanks, Craig, very much.
Absolutely.